Welcome to the Fundayao Podcast, a weekly discussion on remote sensing applications and technologies. I am Aigerim Sultanbek, your host for today's episode. How can radar satellites help protect archaeological sites from looting? Today, we will explore this question with our guests from Wuhan University, Professor Timo Bolz and his PhD student, Cem Boyoglu. They will talk about microwave remote sensing for cultural heritage monitoring, focusing on the experiments to detect looting holes on SAR images. Hello and welcome. And before we start our talk, Professor Timo, can you tell us how Cem first came to you with the idea of his research and what sparked this research project?
Yes, he came to me that some time ago. Basically, when he applied for his PhD program, we already had that idea of working on looting sites and maybe detecting looting. I think that was one of the initial ideas what we had. I'm not so sure, maybe Cem can answer us when we changed to develop that experimental setup. That was a little bit later. I think first we wanted to try on data, and that idea for the experiment that we want to talk about today more, that was a little bit later.
What about you, Cem?
So basically, when I applied for PhD to work with Professor Timo, he already had that idea of looting holes and working on them with SAR. And when I come to China, we discuss about it in general, like what can we do? And we already had some locations that we can work on. But with the idea from Professor Timo, we decided to dig our own holes and try to detect them by using SAR, basically. So when I come, actually, Professor Timo already had the idea. I just did the field work, basically. We started it together.
Can you explain about your research work?
Basically, what I did in my research is we had two experiments. One is about the looting holes and one is about the underground, let's say. For the looting holes, there are some studies about detecting looting holes, but those are mostly big-scale, industrial-sized looting holes from war zones, mostly. Like from Syria, from Afghanistan, Iraq. So what we wanted to do with Professor Timo is we wanted to test small-scale looting holes, let's say up to 3 meters wide opening of the hole, down to 1 meter. So basically, we dug our own looting holes in Wuhan and tried to detect them by using TerraSAR-X SAR images. And on the process, we changed the size of the holes, the depth of the hole, and the size of the opening to get different kind of results, different kind of cases. So in total, we use 4 different sizes for the looting hole that we dug. So basically, we dug our own holes, and then we try to detect them with TerraSAR-X. That was the first experiment, which haven't been done before, because all the other studies are on the places that are already have been done by looters. And for the second experiment, there are some studies that says that SAR penetrates sand, right? So they also talk about how many centimeters microwave signals penetrate the sand. And in some studies, they say it can penetrate up to 25 to 30 centimeters almost. But when I look at those studies, I didn't really see how they prove it, let's say. So we wanted to do an experiment on that topic. So basically, we bury down a corner reflector and then we cover it with sand, with dry sand, then collected SAR images, TerraSAR-X images, to see if we can see that corner reflector under the sand. So that was our second experiment.
From the beginning, when people heard that you are using SAR for detecting looting holes, do they have some biggest misconception?
Yes, the general misconception is mostly people who don't know about SAR or remote sensing in general, they mostly think that I can look to the Earth from space and penetrate anything I want, and I can see anything below the ground, like meters below. That's the biggest misconception people have. We can see anything we want. That's what they think usually. But of course, that's not the truth. I guess it's also about social media, because in social media we see so many misinformation. People doing some AI videos showing that you can see things below the ground, even with LiDAR, like meters down. But mostly it's wrong and giving misinformation to people.
Okay, and let's move to the field. And can you describe what a looted archaeological site actually looks like on the ground? If I were walking there, what I would see?
Basically, those looted areas are mostly archaeological sites that people already know that there was an ancient site. And when you go there, basically, you see the walls, some buildings, but under the ground. Sometimes you see the above, like upper parts of the walls. So when people go there, the looters, when they go there, they usually target those buildings and try to dig like in the middle of it or side of it. So as a visitor, when you go to the looted archaeological site, holes in the middle of all these structures, because they try to start from the middle and then try to find something on the floor of the structure. Sometimes they dig 1 meter, sometimes they dig 5 meters. It depends on the location, of course. But if it's a looted archaeological site, just when you go there, holes in almost every building that you can see visibly.
And you choose SAR, not optical images. So for a listener who has never heard of SAR, why is radar the right tool for this job?
I wouldn't say right tool. I would say radar and optical, both are really useful. Depends on the situation, depends on the case. But when it comes to some specific things, SAR is better than optical, or opposite sometimes. For example, if it's, let's say, cloudy times, you cannot see anything with optical, but with SAR you can penetrate it. So it's more like weather-free, not 100%, except like really heavy rain. You can see mostly through the clouds. And also, as we did in our experiment, that we covered the looting hole that we dug, we covered it with a camouflage. And even with the camouflage, we were able to see it by using SAR, because it's penetrated it, the military camouflage. But with optical, if it's a grassland and you have a military camouflage, probably you cannot really see it. If you are just looking around in the image, probably it will hide the hole from your eyes, basically. But with SAR, we were able to penetrate that camouflage and see through the hole. So I would say, I cannot say SAR is the right tool. I would say SAR is sometimes the best tool if the case fits with the SAR.
And now if we move to the physics behind the detection. Professor Timo, for decades, remote sensing has been used as a supplementary tool in archaeology. And from a signal processing perspective, what makes a looting hole be detectable? So is it the shape, the roughness, or moisture?
Yes. So in terms of looting holes, that would basically be the shape. So we are seeing the shape and the basically round structure of the hole, ideally. And then maybe the mound or the side where the waste of the soil goes. That's also something we may see. The roughness, changes in roughness, that's not really, that may be like similar to the surroundings, and the soil moisture is also probably similar to them. So what we see is the structure, and the problem that we are having, or why Cem's research is so difficult, that the shape is not going to be always the same.
Okay, and it might be the question for both of you. So what exactly are you looking for in the SAR image?
Basically, we look at bright pixels that we get the backscatter. Also, you can do it by comparing before images. So basically, we try to see, as Professor said, the shape is, at least the ones we dug, is like a circular shape. But in reality, sometimes it's not always circular. Sometimes it's square, or sometimes it gets the shape of the structure they are digging in. So it's not always same. But in SAR images, in our case, we mostly search for backscatter that looks like a bit circular, which we get some results where we get really circular shape because of how we put the soil around the hole.
And if we go for the results, yes, you said that the shape is different and sometimes like you put camouflage. So behind this result, can you describe your biggest failure in this experiment until now? And was there a moment when you thought, okay, this just will not work?
Yes, there was moments like this that I thought it's not gonna work. But basically, it's on the process of doing this experiment that sometimes I feel like, okay, we were not be able to see the hole, but actually we did. The parts where I say that it's not going to work was mostly, I would say, about SAR simulation that I tried. For me, it didn't really work, or maybe I didn't work enough for that, let's say. But in general, looting detection, like small-scale looting detection, is I would say, it's a hard task to handle because of the size and sometimes the resolution. So there are different parameters that affects that. But even in the best conditions, where we had a flat surface, no vegetation, and we dug the hole, even in that case, still sometimes we didn't get what we wanted. So even in best conditions, sometimes you can have some problems detecting it. So doing it in real archaeological site with all those structures, rocks, trees, vegetation, the slope, because it's not always flat, then it's a bit challenging task, I would say.
Yes, let me add on that one. So we had problems, or we maybe feared failure in times when we compared this satellite image taken from different directions. So we could see the hole from one direction very clearly, but not from the other direction. And so that was a bit frustrating until we figured it out. So there are many problems, many frustrating risks along the way, because SAR sometimes is a bit difficult and you need the right angle to see something and you don't know which is the right angle before. So there are, I think, lots of at least small failures on that road.
Yeah, true.
And the question is, Professor, for you, like in these kind of cases, like what do you learn as a mentor from watching that process?
Yes, that was a very interesting, or is still, because his work is still going on, right? It's a very interesting process because there is lots of field work involved, and normally most of my students work more on the computer. And with field work, it's very interesting, but also many things can go wrong because you touch the reality somehow. There's so many examples, but we had to move the site where we do our experiments because of construction on the old site. And there are just many small things that you would never think before, right? So that is quite interesting. And as a supervisor or mentor, I'm, I don't know, maybe encouraging more people to try to do some field work because it is interesting. And also you're touching more of the reality of life, basically.
And here, yes, and here with the Beyond the Science and the project work, it's also a project with a human story. So can you both describe how, in 3 words, so how it is to work with each other on this project?
Who should start? Okay, I start then.
Okay.
How to work with each other on this project. So for me, it's 3 words, then it's interesting. That's the main word, because it was always, I found that experiment and the field work just really interesting, very interesting work with interesting and unexpected. Let's take these two words.
What about you, Cem?
I would also say similar things actually. It's interesting because, I mean, for me, what is interesting is I did field work since 2010 almost, like last almost 15 years. I was working in the field as an archaeologist, but it was mostly archaeological work. And this is the first time since I came to China that I'm doing remote sensing work, but still in the field. So I'm kind of enjoying it, like putting these two science together. So interesting, but also working with Professor Timo. I would say honest work because he's an honest professor. If I do something wrong, he just tells me honestly what is wrong. If I say something stupid, he says it's stupid. So sometimes you need someone to tell you that it's stupid. So
certainly sometimes frustrating.
I was
sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sure it is. I'm sure it is.
No, so I'm enjoying it, let's say. So yeah, I would say interesting, honest, and let's say friendly.
Thank you for your honest answers. And also, Cem, recently you moved from detecting looting holes from the seeing under the surface, under the sand. So actually, it sounds science fiction. And can you explain and say what made it take that leap?
After the looting hole experiment, I just wanted to come up with another field experiment that haven't been done before. So I was thinking about how to detect archaeological structures under the ground, under the sand. So I was thinking about doing some experiments, like burying some stones and then trying to detect them. Then I talked to Professor Timo and he said, instead of stones, let's bury the corner reflector. So that's how we started. We buried the corner reflector under the sand and try to detect it, and it worked actually. We will publish it, and the experiment is finished. I'm still working on it, and we will publish it. So basically, it was just a new idea, new experiment idea after the looting experiment.
Can you explain, like we are five, so how does a radar wave get into the sand and what does it find down there? Professor, you can start. Or Cem.
Yeah, microwave, these are very long wavelengths. In our case, in the experiment we are using 3 centimeter wavelengths. These long wavelengths, they can penetrate to a certain degree. Some things like, in our example, sand, but it has to be very dry sand. So there cannot be a lot of moisture in it or water on top of it. Then we would see nothing. And so there are many misconceptions on that, as Cem already explained in the beginning. Some people believe we can penetrate very deep and see everything underground. That's just not true. And there is a lot of scientific questions on how deep we actually can penetrate, which we also do not really know, because I believe it also depends on many things like sand type and humidity. There are many factors coming in. We are trying here some experiment to get kind of like new data, and to my surprise, when Cem basically did the literature research on that, there seems not to be much published in that field, and I was always thinking there has to be more papers, right? So there is a certain gap on experimental proof of that. And
after this question, so when there is a sparse literature on dry sand, like microwave penetration. So how do you design an experiment when you cannot fully rely on prior work?
Yes, so in that case, we just did it, basically, right? We didn't, a very first experiment, we didn't do too much like theoretical thinking about it, because there are papers which show, I don't know, we have papers that clearly say 10, 20 centimeter with X-band should work. So that was our starting point, that we say, let's just bury something about 10 or 20 centimeter and see if we can see that, which we did. right? And then now questions come is what we actually see and so on. But just very experimentally, I think it's a bit Cem's style then, just experimentally, just did it.
Yeah, that's interesting. And Cem, so after your experiment, after you're spending big effort to settle your corner reflector, and when you go back to office and you receive your SAR image, and did you find anything surprising, something that theory had not predicted during the image analysis?
Basically, I would say in the second experiment with the reflector, we have some images that we can see the reflector, but in exactly the same case, there's also image that we don't see the reflector and we don't really know why. So basically, everything is same as the parameters, the location is same, the send size of same, and the parameters of satellite is same. But in one image we see it, in another image we don't see it. That's something that I was surprised and I'm working on, if I'm able to explain it somehow. So that was for me the surprising thing. It could be maybe humidity, but I'm not sure because the situation was totally same actually. And also there was another case that we removed some sand from the reflector and suddenly we didn't see it. So actually we had less sand, but it stopped us from seeing it. That was surprising. And then later we realized why. So there was different situations that I had that feeling like why it's not working. But basically our work is finding out why.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I hope in the future we will read your findings and the surprising outputs from your work. So far we discussed about your experience and some field work, but this project is also an example of something larger, like different disciplines coming together to solve some problems that neither could solve alone. Professor, archaeology is often seen as a humanity discipline and SAR as an engineering. And what does this interdisciplinary exchange contribute to each field?
Yes, that's a good question. But sure, we can benefit from each other. If we start from the other side round, archaeologists can benefit from the knowledge of SAR experts on how to use and interpret that data. That is certainly, because SAR data is, as Cem also said and experienced, sometimes difficult to interpret and sometimes frustrating when we just don't see results where there should be results. So bringing some experts in there can help, certainly, and the other way around, archaeology has very specific and clear problems where SAR maybe can help, but it's also very challenging to do. It's also an interesting engineering problem to work on.
Yes, and Cem, if your method will work at scale, who will use them? Like heritage managers, some police forces, or local communities?
If we are talking about the looting hole experiment, that would basically wouldn't stop the looters because we would detect them after they finish the job basically. But sometimes it could be possible if we exactly know how to do it, because sometimes when they start digging, it takes even 1 month. Some looting takes long time. So in that cases, maybe we would, catch them. But in more realistic scenario, we would find the hole after they finish and leave. So what could we do with that is basically we could share the data with local enforcement, the police, soldier, or just Ministry of Culture. And at least with this kind of study, they would know the, let's say, hot points where the looters target the most. It could help us with that. And how much damage we get in different archaeological sites, how much looting we get, those kind of results we could get. But basically this study is to see what could we do with SAR when it comes to small looting holes. giving up the parameters, the situations, different small experiments in a big experiment actually. So basically this is what I try to create, is like a guide in some way to tell people how can we use it for small scale looting holes. So people can use the results basically.
And that raises an important question about the next generation of scientists. Professor, in the perspective of remote sensing, what does this research tell us about in the future of doctoral training? So should every PhD students be doing this kind of hands-on interdisciplinary fieldwork?
Maybe not every student, right? So we have, there's all kinds of work and research methods and works, paths people take, right? We have students who work very much on algorithms and mathematics, and then we have more hands-on with field works on remote sensing. We have all fields, all different approaches to that. So it's not the same for all. However, I think, and I encourage to go out more, try some field work where it is suitable and possible. For you get this kind of more realistic feeling and results, and also it makes your research more interesting and sometimes also more compelling if you end up then finally defending your PhD thesis, for example, and showing field work and what you have done and all of that. That is very compelling to every committee. So it is useful and interesting, and people, at least in our field, generally appreciate it, right? Because it gives this practical approach and results, which I think many professors like.
And Professor, if you would have a funding agency gave you unlimited resources to expand this work and project, do you have idea what is the first experiment you would run?
Unlimited resources. We would need to make that useful, right? As Cem said, is you need to really make it work in terms of cultural heritage protection. What you need is very high resolution data to find that holes, and then a very repeating the image acquisition quite often, ideally like every day or something like that, so that you could catch then theoretically somebody while they're still working on it. That would be very expensive, and so that requires unlimited resources.
And so before we wrap up, I'd like to end on a broader reflection and ask both of you. Cem, we can start from you. What is the one thing you want every listener to remember about what radar can do for our past as archaeologists?
It depends on which case we use it actually, but in my case I would say, from the experiments we did, I would say in some cases it could be really useful to monitor the archaeological fields, but as Professor said, it would be much better if we could do it in a shorter time. Let's say if we could collect, 10 images per month, it would be perfect to monitor the area. But right now it's not that easy. We don't have that, let's say, technology that's giving us the high resolution image in a couple days. We don't have that yet. But in general, compared to optical images, there are some advantages, but I would say best would be using them together. If we think about protecting the cultural heritage, the best would be using optical and SAR together. I guess that would be the best case, because they could help each other.
Yeah, and let me just...
What about you, Professor?
Yes, just come in there for a second, because actually there are many commercial constellations available that get many more images. I'm not sure if 10 per month, but more than we use. However, we did not have the funding to buy these commercial images so frequently. So there is actually a lot already available, and technology, in terms of technology, it's not a problem of technology, it's a problem of money for us buying the data or for the company or the agency to launch so many satellites. It's just a matter of the number of satellites. The technology is in principle there.
Perhaps, yeah. Perhaps I remember that from this podcast, protecting the past increasingly requires the technologies of the future. And if our time is up, I would like to thank you, Professor Timo, Cem, for joining us today and sharing briefly your work. And I wish you good luck. And I would like to thank our listeners for tuning in to the Fundayao Podcast. And see you next time.
See you.
Thank you for hosting us.